Well, thank you all for coming. Senator Peters, thank you for being here. Day one of the Democratic Convention. Everything going to plan so far this summer for Democrats, Senator? This is all happening than what you expected,
It was
right?
all part of the plan.
Master plan.
Yeah, absolutely.
So some of you might know this in the room, others might not, but Senator Peters is a Harley aficionado, loves riding his bike, and every summer rides around Michigan. Mm-hmm. And you just did your annual ride. Mm-hmm. Tell us about where you went and what you heard while you were out there.
Yeah, happy to. So this is official Senate business that I do across the state. Sure. It is indeed.
Expense it all,
and have great meetings with folks in various places around the state. But I've always said, if you want to get from point A to point B, why not do that on a motorcycle? And then I have a number of my friends that join, or folks usually are guest riders. And in this ride, which we did close to 900 miles, which is a little shorter than normal, we went down through the southern part of the state. It started in Kalamazoo as our first official event. Then went up to Sault Ste. Marie with the Sioux Lock. So it was the zoo to the Sioux ride. And then we had a ride back and had a number of other meetings there. But I have guest riders. They're members of labor unions. They're veterans groups. They're folks who just love motorcycling. And I had anywhere from 25 to 40 motorcycles riding with me. We went across the Mackinac Bridge a couple times, which was great. And had a lot of great meetings. But I guess, to answer your question, what was great is just the enthusiasm from folks. What has been happening over the last few weeks. Certainly a lot of energy out there.
And obviously Michigan is a pivotal state, both for the presidency and for the Senate, for the Senate map. What I'm really curious about is, we hear a lot about the suburbs of Detroit. We hear a lot about Detroit. We obviously hear a lot about Dearborn these days. Tell us what's going on in Kalamazoo, in Midland, in a Saginaw, the mid-sized cities of Michigan, places where Democrats don't necessarily have to win anymore, but you can't get your asses kicked. Is Vice President Harris going to be competitive in those places?
Oh yeah, most definitely, and we're seeing that already just in the numbers. If you look at the polling numbers, and recent ones, have you seen? She's up 3 or 4 points in Michigan over Donald Trump right now. And those are the places where we have to do well. If you look at some of those cities, like Kalamazoo and others, that tend to be more Democratic. It's the rural areas that tend to be more challenging for Democrats just generally across the board, where you can't get killed. And so a big part of that is just being there, present, being in those rural areas. But Kamala will do well in the fact that a lot of people, and I was hearing this through the last year and a half, is that folks just wanted a fresh face, somebody new ideas, younger, all of that. Clearly, she checks all those boxes. Plus, she's a great person. I had the privilege of serving with her in the Senate, and we were actually seatmates. So we sat next to each other, like you and I are sitting right here. We were new, so we were in the back row in the corner. So we were like the new kids on the block in the back, and had a lot of comments about everybody.
Because you came in 14 and she came in 16.
Yeah. But we were back there, and so I got to know her as a friend, but also got to see her passion and see what she's all about. So.
Have you talked to her since Biden dropped out?
Yes.
What kind of questions is she asking about Michigan?
Well, it wasn't a question. We talked. So she called me, within 2 hours after...
that Sunday.
What's that?
That Sunday.
That Sunday, yeah. So she called, and we just talked briefly about Michigan and how I'm going to work together. And obviously she knows my role as the DS chair and the fact that we've got to win all these Senate seats. So we talked a little bit about that as well, because obviously she wants to make sure we have a Senate majority when she's the next president of the United States.
Well, if she was sitting here and she said, Senator Peters, or probably call you Gary, right? That'd be a little awkward.
Gary.
Called you Senator, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's true.
Call you sir, like Trump, with tears in her eyes. Call me sir. What? If she was sitting here and she said, Gary, what are the 2 or 3 most important things I got to do to win Michigan? What would you tell her?
Well, first of all, she just has to be authentic, which she is. People got to see who she is.
How do you do that?
Just now the exposure that she's getting, what we're going to see happening here in the convention. Because when you're in the vice president, it's hard to kind of be known outside of that. But now she has the opportunity to be on stage, to talk, to be out in the crowds, to answer questions from folks. Be herself. Authenticity really matters. I say that to everybody. Authenticity wins elections. But the number one rule of authenticity is you actually have to be authentic.
Yeah.
So if she's authentic, that's going to help her. We're a Midwestern state. People like to know folks are speaking from the heart and not giving the straight story and cares. So she needs to show how she cares, which she does. I know that, and that's going to be very important. And
tell us, since the month that Biden dropped out, or almost a month, what have you seen in your capacity as chairman of the DSCC? What's happening in the battleground states for control of the Senate? What are you seeing in the data?
So, since the
Biden dropped out.
Since
yeah.
there.
Yep.
Well, on the data, things have gotten better for our Senate candidates. But let me be clear.
Sure.
We were doing pretty good prior to that too. If you looked at our races in the battlegrounds, all of our Senate candidates were running above their opponents.
Yeah.
But sometimes by a decent margin in there, which is still not at 50, but still above we like. And the reason for that is pretty straightforward. Senate races are candidate versus candidate races. And we saw that last cycle when I ran the DSCC. We were able to win when no one thought we could win, but because we turned them into candidate versus candidate races, try to get the nationalization out of it.
Sure.
And we have strong incumbents, strong candidates running against flawed Republicans, sometimes seriously flawed. And we were making sure that people saw that contrast, because that's what a campaign's all about. You have a choice when you go in to vote. You don't have two perfect individuals, you have two human beings with strengths and weaknesses. And our candidates have much greater strengths and they have greater weaknesses. And so you put those two together, we were doing well. So having said that, then after the president decided not to run, we just saw happen was enthusiasm for the race increased. And some of the Democratic folks that were not as strong in the polling all of a sudden coalesced around Kamala very, very quickly.
Yeah, your folks came home, right? Yeah.
They definitely did. Yeah, they came home, and we saw that. You're seeing that in the numbers right now. You're seeing it in volunteers. You're seeing it in our fundraising.
What state was the biggest change?
I don't know. I don't know if I can answer which one, but I guess the biggest changes were.
It was Nevada, right?
Yeah, that would have been up. Yeah, I'd say it's probably in that list. Yeah.
Nevada.
Yeah. But we saw across the board. We saw it in Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, other places as well. In any kind of the battleground states, you're not going to see a change like that in Montana or Ohio, but we did in our other battleground states.
So Manchin's retirement puts you at 50-50. John Tester is running in a state that Donald Trump is going to carry, at least by 15 points. It may be closer to 20.
Yeah.
Just tell us, how does that work? How does Tester overcome the top of the ticket, losing the state by 15 to 20 points?
Well, he does it the way he's done it in the past. So he's already done that. He's always had a run in a really tough state. He is authentic. Back to my original comment about Kamala, just authenticity is important. John Tester is as authentic a person from Montana as you could possibly get. Multi-generational farmer there. He understands folks in Montana. He's out in the community. Montana is a really big state geographically, but population-wise is smaller, and so he's gotten to know a lot of folks too in a more personal way that allows you to transcend some of that.
Probably met half of the voters in the state.
Well, yeah, I'm sure a lot of them. In fact, I mean, even in the race, I mean, he will tell you that he has more people come up to him and say, Senator, thank you you're doing a good job.
Right.
I may be a Republican or whatever, but I like you. He says that happens more to him now than it did ever before. So part of that is just being a good senator representing your state, doing it over many years, you build up that goodwill. Then the other advantage, if we're going to make this a candidate versus candidate race, his opponent has serious flaws, and he's not authentic, and that's a big thing. He's from out of state. He bought some land in Montana. He calls himself a rancher. And folks in Montana, if you call yourself a rancher, they might ask you questions like, do you know how to brand cattle?
Right.
And if you don't, they're like, well, yeah, what kind of rancher are you? And as we looked into it further, his opponent, he does have a ranch, but it's a dude ranch. So like people can come and get pictures next to some cattle and ride a horse. And in Montana, folks don't think that's a rancher if you have a dude ranch. And so that authenticity.
If the ranch has Instagram photos, it's not a real ranch.
Probably not. Yeah, probably not. Yeah.
But it's still a tall order to overcome the top of the ticket, losing as significantly as Kamala Harris is probably gonna do.
Yeah, it's not easy, and there's a trend obviously to nationalize races.
Well, yeah, I was gonna ask you about that. Susan Collins is the only current senator who won a state that the opposite party carried
Right.
in a presidential ticket.
Right. So we understand the realities of that, but the dynamics of such a contrast between two candidates in Montana and John being there and building that solid record, I think is going to be the difference in the end.
Do you view the Ohio seat, Sherrod Brown's seat, as significantly different, or do you put it basically in the same place of this is somebody who's going to run his own race and has his own brand? And
Yeah, definitely Sherrod is all of that. So he has also had to run above the base and get swing voters who might be voting differently at the top of the ticket to vote for him. And I've always said, Sherrod, I don't know if any Democrat can win Ohio unless their name is Sherrod Brown. He's the only statewide Democrat there. Which is why I say in this election, I have really good news for folks. I got a guy named Sherrod Brown who's running in Ohio. And given the fact that he is the candidate, I feel really good. And the numbers show that too. He's got a consistent lead. And he's running against a flawed candidate as well that is not authentic.
And today, as you sit here, and you think about Arizona, Pennsylvania, Nevada, Wisconsin, that sort of next tier of seats, you're confident that you're going to hold all those seats?
Yeah, I'm confident.
Every single one of them?
Yeah.
You would do it, Joe Namath today, Gary Peters, you would sit here and you would say you're going to hold all those seats.
Yeah, all those battlegrounds, yeah.
Save that tape. All right.
I will do that. We'll do that. These are going to be close races, though. It's not over yet, but I'm confident we can do that. We're seeing the numbers get better. I would suspect the numbers are going to get tighter as we get closer to the election. That's what happens, and it's what happened last cycle. When you think about last cycle, the numbers were okay, but all of a sudden they got really great for us after the Dobbs decision. But then, as time went on, battleground states do what battleground states do. The numbers get tougher. Yeah. But as long as you stay on your campaign plan, you continue to run your campaign, you stay focused, you don't lose sight of that, you win.
Let me ask you one more thing, because you mentioned this when you were talking about going around Michigan and how people were coming up to you and saying, it's great to have somebody new, a fresh face, younger generation. I mean, tell me about the culture of your party, because voters were screaming this for a year and a half that we don't want this choice. We don't want this campaign. We want different candidates. And you guys didn't listen to voters until, frankly, finally Biden had a June debate, and the fickle hand of fate, it turned out that it was so bad that he had to drop out of the race, hat tip Nancy Pelosi. But, why was it so hard for you guys to make that decision, to finally go to the president and say, thanks for your service, but the country wants somebody else, somebody younger? Why, as Democrats, was that so hard for you guys to let go?
Well, it's not a process like that. So I think that's the thing. That you have an incumbent president who has done a great job. I think we all agree that Joe Biden.
But you saw those numbers for years, right? The same numbers you saw, right?
What about the
showing that voters wanted other options. They didn't want Biden versus Trump.
But so still he has a great record. He's an incumbent president.
Yep.
And so the process is, if someone wants to challenge that and says, I see these numbers that you're talking about, then I'm going to run against him in a primary. We didn't see that happen. You can't have that process unless you have candidates that are going to say, I'm going to run. We did get a Democratic candidate that did run, but that didn't go very far for him.
And he was shunned, and he was ostracized from the party for having the temerity to challenge a sitting president. It turns out he was actually pretty prophetic.
But you have those supporters that supported Joe Biden over the years. They're loyal to him. They're going to continue to support.
He's a nice guy.
He's a nice guy. He's a great guy, and he's a man of incredible character.
Yeah.
The fact that he did what he did and said, I'm going to put my country ahead of anything else, and I'm going to step aside, speaks volumes about who Joe Biden is. And tonight we're going to have an opportunity to celebrate him, to celebrate his 50 years of public service and the fact that he would put the country ahead of himself. Just imagine that. A president that puts himself second to what's good for the country. I can think of a recent president that wouldn't apply to.
Right, because you had a similar scenario in the fall of 2016. It was called Access Hollywood, and their party was desperate for Trump to go. They couldn't stand him, and he obviously refused to go and turned out to have won. In this case, Biden grudgingly, but eventually he did leave.
Yeah.
Have you talked to the president since he dropped out of the race?
No, not since after. No.
How could he best be used the rest of this campaign? Like, if you were running Joe Biden's schedule for the next 80 days to be helpful for the party, what do you do?
Well, I think he can still go out and campaign, and he's got to obviously work with the Harris campaign as to where they think that is helpful to their efforts. But clearly having a president out there talking to people is going to be important, talking about the accomplishments under his administration. I would never underestimate that. You know, when I ran in 14 for the Senate, at that time Barack Obama was his popularity wasn't that great at that time, but we actually had President Obama come in, and I was the only new person to win in 2014. So
and everybody else in the 14 cycle was running from Obama, and you embraced him.
I had him come in.
He probably hasn't forgotten that, has he?
I hope not. I'll remind him when I see him. But he did. No, he was great. He was very supportive, and he motivated a lot of our base, his supporters, and others.
You've won some real tough races. You won some what you could call the political version of away games in tough cycles in the House and the Senate.
Yeah.
You know Michigan pretty well. You've now obviously been around Michigan for 10 years in statewide office. Explain to this room, if you could, the appeal of Donald Trump in places in northern Michigan, on the UP, the kind of classic Macomb Democrat. What's at the core of his appeal with your voters? Because a lot of those voters are your voters, right?
Well, I'm sure I get some folks who will vote for Donald Trump that'll support me. And you know, Michigan is a true state that's a centrist state,
right?
And it goes between center left to center right. So you've always got to kind of build that coalition there. But I think Donald Trump appeals to folks who just want to shake things up.
Yeah.
You know, they're just not happy about their life, or they see the country, whatever it may be. And they saw him as someone who would shake that up and would make that had that vote. But then what we saw, obviously, that was a close election when he won in Michigan. It was a few thousand votes.
And third parties helped.
And third parties helped. So it was a very, very close election. And then it was still close in 20, but he lost.
You mentioned a word earlier, too, I think is important, which is authenticity. And don't people forgive Trump for some of his outlandish comments because they say, at least he's real, he's authentic. The guy in Sterling who works on the line at GM or Ford, right? You know.
Yeah. I think he speaks his mind, and we like the fact he speaks his mind.
Yeah.
And so there's obviously an audience for that, and an electorate for that.
The third-party issue is important in Michigan because obviously Trump isn't president today, were it not for Jill Stein and Gary Johnson taking the votes they did in 2016. We have seen the third-party vote share dissipate in the polling since Kamala Harris became the de facto nominee. Talk about that for a minute, about Kennedy, about Stein. I guess West is now off the ballot in Michigan.
He's off the ballot, yeah.
So it's Stein and Kennedy on the ballot in Michigan.
Yeah.
How important is it that fades?
I think it will fade. I mean, I believe, and you see that in Michigan, that the third party will fade. You see it around the country. But I'll just give you...
Like 5% between them total, you think?
Yeah, it could be less than that. I mean,
less than 5 between them.
If people see it's a real race, a real race and a difference.
Wow.
And so I'll give you an example.
Sure.
When I ran in the House for re-election, and I won a congressional district. When I won, I was the first Democrat since 1893. And then
who's counting?
What's that?
But who's counting?
Who's counting? But and so it was.
Paul is.
Yeah, Paul is, and it was a very competitive district. But in that race that I ran initially to win that, I had a really well-known third-party candidate. His name was Dr. Jack Kevorkian. If you remember Jack Kevorkian, Dr. Death was in that race. And the Republicans thought, well, this is great. We've had this seat since the 1800s. I'm running against an incumbent Republican who is chair of an appropriations committee, and they have Kevorkian in, and they think those are going to draw Democrats away. And in some of the early polling, he was getting like 12-14% of the electorate, which is not great. That's not good in what's going to be a pretty, close race. But in the end, when the actual election came, I can't remember the number. I think it was like 2% or something. Yeah. About 2% he got. So you saw that go down. It was maybe 5 or 6 before the election. Then it went down to 2, and he was a non-factor. And we were able to win that seat for the first time in a long, long time.
I'm sure you've heard from folks in Dearborn and other parts of the Arab American community of Michigan. It's not just Dearborn. What's your message to folks who are unhappy with this administration's Middle East policy? Like, what's your elevator pitch to them as to why they should stick and vote Democrat this year for the presidency, for Senate, for Congress, if they're pissed about this administration's policy in the Middle East, what do you say to them?
Well, if it's specifically to Gaza,
yes,
you're talking about.
Correct.
So, and I think we're seeing, we got to talk about where Kamala Harris is, because she's the one that's going to be on the ballot. And look at her views on it right now. I think she is talking to a lot of folks who feel very frustrated that they're not being listened to by folks, not just this administration, but generally about what's happening in Gaza. And Kamala, in her speech, has been very clear that certainly Hamas is a horrible terrorist organization that has engaged in unspeakable atrocities. The Israelis have a right to defend themselves against that. But in all of that, you've got a group of folks who are caught in the middle. Innocent folks who are caught in the middle that are dealing with the ravages of a horrible war. And we got to get a ceasefire. We got to try to bring peace there. Let's hope that the efforts that President Biden is engaged in right now will bring about a peace agreement. We're seeing how complex that is to try to make that happen. But just understanding what's happening on the ground and the suffering that's occurring with innocent folks caught in the middle is a big part of it. It doesn't gonna go away. It's not gonna solve it, but it's important for people to see that. And then you compare, if you're in the Arab community or the Muslim community, oh my God, you can't vote for Donald Trump. I mean, the contrast there is about as wide as you can get.
Let me just ask you directly. Do you think it's important that Vice President Harris show that there are some differences or at least distinctions between her policy when it comes to the Middle East and Gaza with President Biden?
Well, it shows that she's her own person. She thinks her own way.
She ought to do that, you think?
Yes, she is going to be our next president, and she has to start telling folks this is where she comes from, what she believes in. And that's going to be natural. So there's going to be things that she agrees. There's going to be things you don't agree.
And when it comes to Michigan, though, you think it's important for her to show that distinction on her views toward Gaza with President Biden?
Yeah, if she has those views, she has to be clear about whatever those views are. She'll have to make.
Doesn't she?
Yeah, and I think she has differences, and she'll talk about it. Back to authenticity. Be who you are.
Yeah.
Be what's in your gut. Tell us what motivates you, what drives you. People want to see that.
Will you convey to her at some point in the next couple of weeks that she ought to do that?
Yes. Oh, if I have a chance to, yeah.
I'm sure you will.
I probably will.
Yeah. What should folks know about Kamala Harris that you knew from getting to know her, sitting with her in the Senate?
Well, I didn't really know her at all as coming in as a new member. But what I just got to know her as really has a good sense of humor. She's
funny.
She's warm. She can enjoy a good joke and make fun of folks, and do things like all of us do. She's no different than all of that.
Right.
She's just a regular, down-to-earth person. But I also she's very passionate about what she cares about.
Why didn't that come through more in the last 3.5 years? Because she does have a sense of humor. She does love, shooting the bull a little bit. There's this great clip I'm sure you've seen where she's doing a Michael Bennett impression when Bennett's walking in to get sworn in, and she does a Bennett impression. It's a great Bennett impression.
Yeah.
But we haven't seen that really. Is that because she just was trying to do the right thing with Biden and not step out of line and be a good number two? Or?
I just think it's hard. Yeah, it's hard when you're a vice president. You don't get an opportunity to do that. But she's a really good sport. I'll share a story of as we were getting to know each other. However it came up, I said, we have really good whiskey in Michigan. We're one of the leading states in the distillery. What's that? Bourbon.
You're a bourbon guy. Yeah,
bourbon. So I said, Kamala, you should come on over. You can try some Michigan whiskey. And she was a good sport. So she came over to the office, and we were out. I have a little balcony, kind of looks out over the town, and we brought out some Michigan whiskey. I don't know. To this day, I don't know if she really likes it. But she was very. Whiskey in general. I wouldn't let her talk about that. But she was a great sport. She enjoyed it. We had great conversation. She's just someone you can just hang with and feel like she is the real deal.
And if voters
and that makes a difference.
Yeah, and if voters in Michigan see that side of her, much more likely to win, right?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
And carry Michigan and beyond. Let's talk about you for a minute. We're sort of winding down here. You're a classic Michigan guy in the sense that maybe you're a little overlooked, you're a little bit underrated. Chip on your shoulder because of that.
No.
Chuck Schumer is not going anywhere, obviously, anytime soon. If Senator Schumer is listening out there, and he always is, we're not trying to write your obit yet. But are you interested one day in being the Democratic leader of the Senate?
I'm interested in continuing to do my work as chairman of Homeland Security and Government Affairs, which keeps me pretty busy. in addition to that's my day job, in addition to my after-hours job as the DSCC chair. So there's so much more we need to do in that area, and I look forward to that. I'm really engaged in cybersecurity issues, artificial intelligence. How do we think about the future of that? These are big questions. I think we're at a pivotal moment in our history that we've got to think these things through deeply and be thoughtful about it and set the right direction. I want to be part of that.
That wasn't a no that I heard. You don't want to be vice president, though. It sounds like from your talking about that job at all, right? Being VP doesn't appeal to you?
I think that's already taken, if I recall. I think
what happened with that, by the way?
Just saying, I think it's already done.
Who planted that? Who planted that story about Peters being looked at for
Was
VP?
that you? Really?
I think it was some folks in the fourth row here in this room, perhaps. Did she talk to you at all about VP? Was that a conversation that was had, or
I'm not going to talk about any of the process. Let's look forward. Look forward. We got Tim Walz. He's a great candidate. I served with him in the House as well. And talk about authenticity. Here we got a theme going here. An authentic guy. Certainly, Tim is the ultimate of authenticity as well, which is why this ticket is so powerful. And you add that to the authenticity of all of our Senate candidates and the candidate contrast. Right. We're gonna win the presidency. We're going to hold the majority in the Senate. We even have a shot to pick up either Florida or Texas. I believe that's real. And we'll see what happens in the House. So I'm very optimistic.
And last question for you. How important for Michigan is it that President Biden gets a ceasefire, do you think, in the Middle East?
Well, I just think it's important for bigger than that.
Of course.
I just think it's important that we get that ceasefire. We got to find some resolution, a real resolution in that part of the world. So this is, and now the president is not running for re-election. I know he's totally committed to focus on that issue.
Yeah.
This would be a massive legacy issue for him.
Yes.
And absolutely important and critical for world peace and security.
Gary Peters, motorcycle rider, bourbon drinker, potential candidate for Senate Democratic leader down the road. Thanks for your time today.
Thank you.
Grateful. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.